Okay, welcome back, everyone. We're going to start our afternoon session, creating a stellar resume or CV with Val Cervarich, if I've pronounced that correctly. Val runs Writing Help KC, a business that supports job seekers, academics, and self-publishing authors with their writing and editing needs. She completed her master's in teaching English in 2016 and began her business as a side hustle. Val's writing knowledge and collaborative approach to help her grow Writing KC into a full-time venture by 2020. After working with hundreds of individuals, Val continues to build clients' self-confidence and enhance their writing communication. With that, I will stop sharing to allow Val to take over.
All right.
And
Thank you for the introduction.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Can you all see that slideshow there?
It's loading now. Okay.
Okay. Well, thank you again for the introduction. As she said, my name is Val Cervarich, and I own Writing Help KC. I used to work at KU Med and specifically with the postdocs, so I'm very familiar with a lot of the needs that you encounter along the way, especially when it comes to the job search. Today we're going to cover resumes and CVs, but we'll mostly focus on CVs since this is the academia day. But please feel free to drop something in the chat if you have a question. Since I'm not in the room, Becca will kind of help facilitate if you do have questions that you want to hop in. But I also have some time at the end built in for you all. So let's go ahead and get started. So today we will go over prepping for your applications. There's quite a bit of work that goes into building out your materials. So I like to give people a few key tips for that. Then we'll talk about the differences between resumes and CVs. Then we'll go over some things related to cover letters. And we'll talk about some submission tips, kind of issues that I've seen having been on hiring committees and just general etiquette in terms of how you follow up and things like that. And then I have my contact information at the end as well. All right, so as you're preparing for applications, whether it's for industry or academia, my number one tip for you is to make sure that you are researching the institution or company where you're applying. And by that, I mean you are very familiar with their website, whatever they have published, the type of research as much as is allowed to be publicized. You are taking copious notes if you've met anybody, but really understand what their mission and vision is. And a lot of that is going to inform how you structure your content. If you're applying to a company that's a smaller startup, a lot of times those are a little bit more flexible and creative in the types of materials that they see. But generally speaking, most companies for industry position will want, simple traditional resumes. Academic institutions, they're going to ask for those CVs. So again, we'll talk about the differences between those two, but as you're thinking about how to put these materials together, you probably already have a base form of either one of those, being where you are in your career, but definitely add to that in the sense of how you go about the job description. You're not just looking at that description. You're going beyond. You're seeking out what makes that company who they are and what they do. The second tip is to maintain a centralized list of your skills, projects, research, and accomplishments. So what I mean by this is that you have a Google Doc or whatever platform you choose to do this on, but you are regularly visiting this document. I have a reminder on my calendar for mine to go in every 2 to 3 months to update things that I've done. And I recommend this because that you start this now, regardless of how far out you might be from applying for jobs. And the reason is you have lots of different versions of your CVs or your resumes. You also get into the day to day and down in the weeds, and you kind of forget um, what all you have accomplished, and it's usually a lot. So you want to make sure that this list is updated every 2 to 3 years, and this will help you to customize all of the content when it comes time to submit each application. Because unfortunately, for most applications, you can't just submit the same materials over and over. There is a great amount of customization that should happen to incorporate the keywords and themes that you see when you research the company or institution, as well as thinking through how you what piqued your interest about the company and the position, or the institution and the position. And so this is so important. I cannot emphasize this enough. Make sure you're keeping this up to date. If you get to the point where you're starting this document and you think, wow, I don't know how to go about doing this, even if you're doing it every 2 to 3 months, visit your calendar, look at your notebook if you have to-do lists. Make sure that you're capturing all of that, because you never know what exactly might be helpful in discussing things during an interview and in how you present yourself on paper for the initial application. All right. So another common concern that comes up when I work with people on their resumes and CVs is that they don't feel that they have skills that qualify for the business or more professional type buzzwords that you see in job descriptions. So I just wanted to definitely make sure that you all know you have a lot of these skills. So if you are teaching, you are conducting needs assessments and you are helping with curriculum development. If you are researching, you are definitely skilled in project management and data analysis. For campus involvement, if you're involved with KPA or you serve on a research committee, maybe you have something else that you do outside, through with community organizations. You have leadership skills, possibly budgeting skills, coordinating volunteers or meetings, whatever the case is. Group projects. This is more for your time in graduate school, probably, but also it can apply in the lab. But collaboration and organizational skills, and then writing and presenting, which all of you do every day. The keys that people forget about with writing and presenting is that you are communicating complex ideas. So if you are going out into a public setting where you have to change the language to accommodate the audience, that requires a great deal of empathy and putting yourself in that person's place to think about where they're coming from and what they need to know. So those are ways that you can think about how you do these things on campus, in the lab, throughout the community, and how they transfer into this more corporate or institutional setting. Next, I recommend that you create a spreadsheet to track applications. By the time you get done submitting one application, it's pretty exhausting, and I don't want you all to forget the key details. So make sure you're tracking them. You're including the institution or company name, website links, position title, any notes that you took when you were researching that specific institution and position, the date you submitted, and any networking connections. So let's say you go to a conference, whether it's online or in person, and you meet somebody who works for this company or this institution. Make notes of that, because if later on you think you might be interested in a position that they have, then you can go ahead and, possibly name drop them. You could send them an email and say, oh, yeah, I can email them and let them know I'm applying, because I've done that for several people when I worked at different institutions. And networking is so powerful. So I definitely highly recommend that you keep track of those things as you're going through your job application preparations. All right, so good resumes and CVs are organized and have consistent formatting. we're not getting too fancy here. There are several templates available, mostly for resumes. I think there are a couple for CVs, but the templates that are available in Microsoft Word or on canva.com, if you all are familiar with that, typically they're not the best in terms of organizing your content in a way that's appropriate for where you're submitting. And the reason I say that, and this is especially true for industry positions, usually those kind of flashy documents with colors and designs on them are um, set up with tables or charts. And it's really hard for you to edit and you don't have time to worry about that. And two, those don't play well with the application systems. So the application systems, especially at larger institutions, go through, they have this applicant tracking system, and on the back end, they have coded keywords from a job description. And those are, the scanning tools are looking for those in the applications. So if you're not customizing and incorporating those keywords from the job description and any research that you did on the company, most likely you're not going to make it to the HR person's desk. So you definitely want to make sure that you're creating your own template and make sure that it's organized and has consistent formatting. The good news is once you have one of these documents created, it's easy to change it for each iteration that you need. The frustrating thing is that a lot of times, even by the time this gets to the HR person's desk and then the hiring committee, a lot of times there are still multiple applicants and your resume or CV may only be reviewed for a few seconds. So you definitely want to make sure that it's easy for them to navigate, that you have the most important information toward the top or the beginning of the document. So this is why I say it needs to be organized and have consistent formatting. You're always thinking about what the reader needs, and they need all the important stuff up front, and they need to be able to scan quickly. You don't want to use text smaller than 10-point font. So one of the things that is really tempting for a lot of people, this is more an issue for resume applications, but resumes typically want you to do everything on one page. And again, that's because they're only reviewing a small amount of, they only have a small amount of time to review multiple applications. So you have unlimited pages with CVs, so there's no need for you to put it in 10-point font. And I will tell you that it sounds silly because you're like, well, what if they're looking at it on a PDF? Like, what difference does it make? They can zoom in. I had several hiring committee members that always printed the materials out. So you just never know. You want to make it as legible as possible and easy for the reader. So everything's centered around what will be easiest for the reviewer. Then you want to make sure you're highlighting and briefly describing accomplishments. So this is different than your responsibilities. So a lot of people, when they read a job description, they'll say, oh, well, I've done something similar and I can relate it to this. But you need to describe that. You need to show what the problem was, the action you took, and then the result, not just that you were responsible for this task. So that's what I mean by accomplishments rather than just listing your responsibilities. They can look at lists all day of your skills and what responsibilities you have, but they want to know what you actually accomplished in your role. You want to use powerful verbs and or descriptions. So this plays into that accomplishments. I have a resource that I will share with you later to talk more about some verbs, and this is it's a great list actually for how they organize it into different categories, and it will be very helpful for you all in developing the content both for your resume or CV. Of course, you want to make sure they're grammatically correct and error-free. A lot more time goes into that for the CVs because they are so lengthy. But once you pick a pattern or a style guide, so if you're following APA, AMA, Chicago, whatever is used in your field, um, make sure that that's consistent throughout your document. So you list your publications, your presentations, all of that in the same, using the same style guide structure. And then of course you want to make sure that your resume and or CV complements your LinkedIn profile. Few people that I've talked to before have ResearchGate profiles as well. If you feel that that is more relevant to the position where you're applying, that's fine. But I will tell you, LinkedIn is a very important recruitment tool, especially for industry and especially at larger institutions. So when possible, and you have gotten, the base form of your resume or CV, make sure you don't have to create original content again. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Just make sure you have the same content. And if there are other sections that maybe you have to leave off, this is especially for resumes, but let's say you have some other really impressive projects, but you just don't have the space. Those are things that you can put on your LinkedIn profile, and your LinkedIn profile can be a URL on your document so they can go and look. And the good thing is, if you can see, sometimes you can see who is looking at your profile. So that kind of gives you a little more insight into the job search process. Okay, so that's the standard, these are the standard things to make a good resume and CV. But let's talk a little bit more specifically about what these two documents look like. So on the left side, we've got our resume, and the right side for CV. So one point of confusion, especially for those who are not from the US, is that CV is interchangeable a lot of times for resume. So like for companies based in Europe, they might ask for a CV, but if you read, they really only want 1 to 2 pages. So make sure that you are paying attention and giving them what they're asking for. But generally in the US, resumes are for industry positions and CVs are for academia. Um, for a resume, this is going to hurt a little bit because you all spend so much time in school and you do such a great job getting your degrees and your training, but they want your experience first because it's kind of a given that you are applying for a job that you're qualified for. And if the minimum requirement is a PhD, they're just going to assume that you have that. They want to know. Remember that what I said about the few seconds that someone's reviewing your document? Catch them with your experience here, okay? Then you list your education. The resume is definitely emphasizing your accomplishments. Bullet point format instead of every once in a while, I'll get somebody who has paragraph format. Sometimes that's more appropriate for the CV, but definitely, again, it's easier to scan. So if you're making an impression, it's kind of like an elevator pitch. If you only have a few seconds, make it easy on them. Use the bullet points. Try to get it down to 1 page. Every once in a while, you can get away with 2. I know it's really hard for you all because you have so much experience by the time you're done with your postdoc. But the resumes really take a lot of concentration to get everything down to 1 page. But the key thing to remember is you're customizing each application to the job description. So you may have a lot more experience than will fit on there, but what are they specifically looking for? That's what you need to focus on. For the CV, much more flexible. We love a good long CV in academia, right? So you've got your education first because they want to know where you were trained, who you worked with, any post-graduation certifications, all that good stuff. Then you go into your experience. And again, for both of these, you're gonna do reverse chronological. So most recent to furthest in the past. So that way, when they have these different headers throughout your document, somebody can go and look, oh, this is what they did recently in each of these areas. But the ordering of the other headers for those sections is much more flexible. So I told you, experience in education, and maybe if you have skills or awards or something for your resume, that's fine. In CVs, you're very flexible, and it's really going to depend on if it's a more research or teaching oriented position. But we can talk about how to play with those. Also, use the same style guide. I mentioned this already, but I cannot emphasize this enough. If you publish most often in using APA or AMA, use that on your CV, because it's going to be familiar to the reviewer, and make it the same throughout. I've seen many people who, they've kind of pieced things together from other submissions, and it's just a quick thing that you can do that is building consistency in your brand and helping deliver the right message. Again, CVs, unlimited pages. So you have as much space as you need to. I've edited some that are like 60 or 75 pages. They can be so crazy long. So definitely don't hesitate with those. All right. So the resume structure, just really quickly, again, to review this, you have your header. So get rid of your physical address and include your LinkedIn profile link instead. One benefit of that, beyond prompting them to go look at your LinkedIn and then you may be knowing about that, is that most of the time, if you are applying to an out of state position, they may not have funding necessarily to help with your move. So it could create a point of bias, unfortunately, if they see, oh, this person's in Kansas and we're based in California. You don't want to create any of that. So yes, they could go and figure that out, when they see your experience, but that header again is at it's the top of the page. So don't give them any reason not to continue. So name, email, phone number, LinkedIn profile, but no snail mail because they're not going to be sending you anything in the mail. Then make sure you're matching your cover letter in the same way. And this goes for all documents. So when you get to the academia applications, you've got, teaching or research philosophies, diversity statements, things like that. Everything should be consistent. And again, that's for the people who print when it comes to the hiring committee. So make sure that if, somebody's going to print it, that it's clear who each of the documents belongs to. Then you will go into a professional summary. So this is truly the elevator pitch that's written out. If you only have 15 to 30 seconds to make an impression when you're standing in an elevator with somebody, what are you going to talk about? So this is going to be things like how long you've been in the field, the number of publications or presentations you've done, any grants or awards that you've received. This is very high level, but again, this is at the top of the page. So you want to pique interest, show, yes, I'm qualified for this, but it's not an objective. It's not to say to obtain a job in blah, blah, blah. Like, duh, they already know that. You're applying for the job. Use your space, okay? Resumes are, one page. You want to use the space wisely. Then you go into your experience and qualifications. And again, keywords from the job description and your research on the company or institution are key. Then you move into your education, skills and abilities, awards. Those things kind of get flexible. Some of it may be in the professional summary. So that's all I'm going to say about resumes, because I think you've got somebody tomorrow who's going to go over those. So I want to talk more about categories because CVs can be so lengthy. What you can do. So definitely you're going to have a header, then your education, but then the rest of these you have professional interests. So this could be something similar to the professional summary, but you're kind of focusing on, high level, like these are the things I'm really passionate about. I have a lot of experience here. And so again, if that's toward the top of the document or the beginning, that's a way to pique their interest and say, oh yeah, I want to keep reading about this person and what they've done. So your research experience and interests, mentoring experience, awards and grants, teaching experience, like all of these things most of you have done in some capacity or another. Again, you want to put these in order to mimic the job priority. So if the job is more research focused, your research experience and maybe your mentoring and your publications and presentations are going to be closer to the beginning, right? And then the other stuff comes later. If it's more teaching focused, you're going to swap. You're going to put the teaching experience, mentoring, um, professional development, maybe your university service, um, anything that is related to the actual like classroom or administrative side of things will go sooner. So again, if I have, a 60-page document on my desk and I'm flipping through it and I think, wow, this person has so much great experience, but I really want to know how are they going to interact with the students because this is a teaching focused position. And eventually we want somebody to become a curriculum coordinator. Um, they want to know that that's there at the beginning, like that you have that experience and you're ready to go. So within each of these categories, it's very similar to the resume in that you can put your bullet points to list out the different elements and accomplishments within each category. But be careful with your copying and pasting and moving things around when you customize each application. Um, I do encourage everybody to keep like one centralized copy and then just create new ones and not always, just make extra copies because you never know what's going to happen and make sure you're backing them up. But yes, definitely review each current and previous position when you go to add your content because sometimes there are some issues with like you haven't updated the dates or the verbs are still in present tense and things like that. So that's what I mean by being careful with your copying and pasting. CV tips, we've talked about this. I got ahead of myself. Let's talk more about the compelling language to evoke some emotion and pique interest. Um, in creative writing, there is a concept called show, don't tell. And basically, this is very much emphasized in fiction writing. You want to create this image of a setting. You're not just going to tell them where they are, right? Um, it's the same actually in nonfiction as well. This is considered a nonfiction work. But what I mean by this is that I want you to tell a story about your accomplishments. So I mentioned before, you've got a problem that you've encountered, you talk about the action that you took, and then the result. So that's what I mean by be specific and use examples. Um, think about, visit that list, that centralized list that you have and what you've accomplished. So you did XYZ research. What was the outcome of that? Did you present it to your peers at an international conference or were you invited to a special symposium or were you invited to author a chapter in a book. Like there are lots of things that can come from your research experience, your teaching experience, your mentoring experience. So be specific about what accomplishments that work led to. Use compelling verbs and language. So I'll send these slides over to Becca after and to share with you all. But this is a link from a website called muse.com, and I love it because it has division has divided the verbs into different categories. So it's helpful not only when you go to kind of fine tune your language and make sure that it is evoking some emotion and imagery. It's helpful for brainstorming. If you think, oh yeah, I accelerated this project by doing, implementing a new system and that improved communication across the lab. Like those things shouldn't be forgotten. So that's why I say you can use it as a brainstorming tool. And then, of course, make sure that you're giving this, to a trusted peer who will give you honest feedback, have them review it and ask them if you feel that it's presented in a way that, they're compelling, that they feel like this is compelling language and they would be interested to talk to you in an interview. So I think a lot of you have probably been through several rounds of interviews. So ask a peer who would know that experience and would give you that feedback. You can always hire people to do it as well, but a lot of times you have good resources available on campus or in or near your labs. Okay, what are we doing on time? Okay, phew. Cover letters. So we've talked a lot about content for your resumes and CVs, but another really crucial piece, especially for academia, is the cover letter. Um, Cover letters are probably people's least favorite part of the job application process, besides like re-entering all of the data that you already have on your documents into their application system. But cover letters, I look at it as a way to fill in some gaps. So the resume and CV is an outline. So yes, you have unlimited pages with the CV, but if you're still just listing your publications or your presentations or your work with a committee on campus, what are you leaving off the paper? So that's something you can think about. The cover letters tell the stories in depth. So you can think of the stories to put in your cover letter as mini case studies. I use this to help you all scientists understand that you already are presenting a lot of this information in various forms through your lab updates, through your journal articles that you're submitting, through conference presentation applications. You've got lots of mini case studies that you can talk about. So again, we're going to talk about that problem, action, and result. That PAR acronym is such a lifesaver. Um, so I use this analogy of resume and CV being like the foundation and the basic structure of a house, and the cover letter adds the detail and the flair. So as you can see on the right, that is a cute house with 2 windows and a red roof and a light outside and a gray door. I know a lot more about the house because there's more imagery and description, right? So a good cover letter addresses a specific audience. In academia, a lot of times for a job description, they will post the name of the hiring committee chair. If you can put that specifically on the to line, to Dr. or Professor X or whatever it is, for the blah, blah, blah position, that's awesome. If they don't have that, or if this is a cover letter for an industry position and you have no idea where you're submitting it, do not put to whom it may concern. Always include the position title. So that's what I mean by committee, to the hiring committee for XYZ position. If you don't have, to professor blah, blah, blah for the position. So be specific. That's a quick, detailed thing that will show that you took time to research about it. I always loved that when I was on a hiring committee. I was like, wow, they took a few minutes to like figure out how this was structured. And even if it wasn't the right person, it was still nice that they took the time to address somebody specifically in the department. So I really advise you to keep that in mind as you're doing your research. You are not repeating information or regurgitating your entire resume as part of your cover letter. You are building upon it. So remember the analogy of, the basic structure that I showed for that house. You're adding the filling in the details that you are leaving off your resume or CV. Include a captivating opening and memorable content. You all have so many of these mini case studies, I guarantee you that you can put into a cover letter that you're going to be figuring what to leave out. So when you use that acronym, problem, action, result, the PAR acronym, you will have no problem doing this. When I say a captivating opening, um, again, if somebody is only able to spend a few seconds reading your documents, what will pique their interest? So for those applying to a startup, like I mentioned earlier, sometimes they're a little more creative and you can kind of play around a bit. For academia, you're going to want to jump into like, this is my experience and this is why I'm motivated to join you. And that can be influenced by what draws you to that institution. So after you've done the research about them, what specifically made you think, yes, this is the place where I want to be, and this is the place where I can contribute to the field. So that's an opportunity for you to dive more into, as you work through the cover letter, the specific interests that you have. Then you can demonstrate your problem solving abilities and other skills through your mini case studies. So notice I didn't say include a list of your attributes or characteristics. So again, your storytelling. Our brains are hardwired for story. Just as humans, we want the three-part bit. We want the beginning, the middle, and the end. So that's why the PAR acronym is awesome. So make sure that you are completing each of those so the reviewer isn't having to fill in the gaps or ask too many questions. And then get frustrated because they can't ask you unless you're in the interview with them. So the cover letter is really an opportunity to distinguish yourself. If for some reason, this isn't common in academia, but if for some reason it's listed as optional to do the cover letter, do it anyway. And the reason I say that is because it really can set you apart. It will tell me as the reviewer, yes, this person took time to write this cover letter and to address the things that are important to us. Two, I get a better sense of personality because all the resumes and the CVs kind of, because they are what they are, they're structured the same way. And also, it's an opportunity for you to be a little creative. Of course, maintaining professionalism, but you have an opportunity to share your personality on paper. So definitely submit the cover letter, even if it's optional. You are going to highlight relevant experience that matches the job description. So again, I know you all have a lot of experience to include and to discuss, but what are they looking for? So revisit the job description, look at the words that are repeated. Those are your keywords. Look at the common words between the website mission, vision, department, mission, vision, whatever. If they have like a page on their website where they talk about the research that they're doing, or they feature a professor who has gotten involved with science in the community programs or something like that. Like, what is important to them? And make sure that you are incorporating that relevant experience in there. And then, of course, conclude with a call to action. So you want to prompt them to connect with you. I know that, they're getting more into live events and conferences and things, but maybe you're applying to a position and you know that someone from that department is going to present at a conference that you're attending. Write that in there. Like, make as many connections as you can, but make sure that they know that you're ready to come in to interview. So that's what the call to action means. I talked about personality while remaining professional. And then, of course, make sure it's readable and error-free. So again, show these materials to a trusted colleague. Another set of eyes never hurts for the grammar and spelling punctuation as well. Okay, so I just used this visual to help you all understand what how the cover letter is set up. You have a little bit more flexibility maybe for 2 pages, page and a half, 2 pages for academia, but I just did 1 page to show you kind of how this works. So I have Mr. Enright up here, who is, at the header is clear. It's got name, email, phone number, LinkedIn link. Then you have the date. Then the first paragraph is your elevator pitch. So in writing, what's your pitch to pique the interest and to make your captivating opening? Are you all familiar with elevator pitches? Have you talked about these? It's just like a quick 15 to 30 seconds. If you're stuck on an elevator with your dream boss, what are you going to talk about to make sure that they want to hire you? So that's, again, goes to the top of the page, because if that's the only part that's being reviewed, you want to pique their interest. Then you have your mini case study. So that can be 2 to 3 paragraphs, depending on how long it will take you to cover, your problem, action, and result for your examples. And then you wrap up with your how to connect and your sign off. So to develop content for resume, CV, cover letter, something that I recommend is that you all Google behavioral interview questions or STAR interview questions. STAR is similar to the PAR acronym that I use. I think it's called situation, task, action, and result. I just like PAR because it's a little bit simpler, but usually for interview stage, they're called STAR. All of you probably have a smartphone. There is a recording voice memos app on most of these phones. This sounds ridiculous, and I hate doing it myself because I really don't like to hear myself talk. But record your answers to these various questions and then type them out. You've got your bullet points, you've got your cover letter content. They're going to ask you things like, describe a time when your PI wasn't around and how you handled a crisis or something. Like, these are defining moments of you as a professional, and you have to answer these in an interview. So you may as well use the content you're practicing for the interview by listening to yourself and how you're responding, but then you're also able to transcribe. There's also a great feature in Google Docs where you can actually record as you speak. So if you want to have both of those pieces going, where you have your Google Doc pulled up, it's not an amazing transcription, but it's, pretty decent. Then you can play your recording and go back and clean it up. You've got some written content then. And that is hopefully a lot less intimidating to people than opening up a document and staring at the blank screen. But talking is often much, much easier for people, especially when it comes to more technical things. And in interview settings, most likely you will be interviewing with subject matter experts, but these documents don't get to those people until later. So you want to make sure that the content that is on there is communicated in a way that is meaningful and helpful and explanatory, rather than leaving them with tons of questions. I'm not saying you don't want them to have any questions, because you do want them to be curious. I just mean make sure that you are explaining it appropriately to the audience. And a lot of times the initial audience is not someone who has technical or scientific background. So practice these questions, record yourself, transcribe, put it in the form, either, your bullet points on a resume, somewhere in your CV, or in your cover letter. Easy peasy. Plus you double dip, which is awesome. All right. Before submitting, make sure you have updated and customized keywords and phrases according to the job description and or company or institution's website. So when you've identified those keywords, I know it seems odd to what they in the tech world call keyword stuffing, but you want to do that because of those applicant tracking systems and the way that they're set up. They're looking for those keywords, so put them in. Each institution has kind of their own lingo and jargon that they use, and that's what I mean by keywords. So pay attention to those, do some analysis, revisit your high school and college days of looking for repeated phrases. Make sure those things are incorporated into your materials. Make sure you have clear headings and legible font. So I'm not a big fan of super fancy documents. I'd rather have more content than the design to be something that's like, wow, this is so pretty. Because if I'm on a hiring committee, like my task is to hire somebody who's appropriate for this position. And if I am distracted by all of the colors because I'm looking at the design rather than your detail, it's probably not a great fit. So clear headings, easily scanned, legible font. Um, Tip Arial Narrow is a font that allows you, it's still legible, but it's slightly more condensed than some of the others, so you can get more on the page. But play around with it because you want to make sure that you're maximizing the space that you have, especially when it comes to your one-page resume. Save your files as PDFs. I cannot tell you how many times I got Word documents. And depending on if you're on a Mac or a PC and you're submitting to somebody on the opposite, like sometimes funky things can happen. So if you do a PDF and you submit that, that's not going to be an issue. So please, please, please save it as a PDF. Along with that, put your name in the file name. Sometimes when I got, my 15 applicants or whatever to review for a position, it would just, I'd have like 10 resumes, resume 1, 2, 3. By the time I saved all of them and had to go in and like save their name and their last name, just don't make the reviewer do that. It's a quick, easy thing for you to do. First name, last name, underscore resume, underscore cover letter, underscore teaching philosophy, whatever. No pictures. No pictures on their documents. I see this once in a while. It's honestly more common outside the US, which is interesting. Some people say, well, what's the difference if I have it on there versus them going to LinkedIn and seeing my picture? Again, traditionally in the US, pictures are not great because they allow for another point of bias. I think by the time they would be interested to go to your LinkedIn profile, they're really interested in you. So like pictures won't matter, but don't put them on the actual documents that you're submitting for the application. Every once in a while, you might be required to do that, but it's usually for medical school positions. So I don't know that that would be relevant to most of your jobs you're applying for. And then, when you're getting tight on space and you want to get all your things in there, make sure you at least have 1/2 inch margins on all sides. So if you've kind of gone out or up and down, again, for those who print the documents, if you're going beyond that, you might be losing some of that content, and I don't want that to happen. So make sure you're cognizant of that. And then, of course, update your LinkedIn profile. If you've taken time to, get your old resume or CV updated and then you submit and you don't have some of the content, like you just need to do some copying and pasting and organize it and make sure that it's ready to go. All right, questions. This is how to contact me. I will share these slides with Becca, and I also have a handout that goes over like a checklist of these things. So yeah, we have a few minutes for questions.
Thank you so much, Val.
You're
Is
welcome.
anyone in the audience? I don't see any in the chat as of now.
Okay.
Does anyone in the audience have a question?
No questions.
Okay, I'll start with a question then.
Okay.
As you're going through all of these documents and wanting to streamline them,
Mhm.
and is it best to do that just in with the headings and like the style of what the page looks like, or you trying to be repetitive in things so that it has the same theme, what would your opinion be on that, particularly for academic positions where you have a diversity statement and teaching philosophy and CV, etc.?
Yeah, so in the cases for academia where you are required to submit multiple statements or philosophies or whatever they may call them, I think that you can treat it similarly as you would a cover letter, and that you can leave the bullet points on the respective sections on the CV and then expand upon them in those statements. Most of the time, I think that that content probably doesn't need the paragraph format on the CV, um, because you do have the space to do it on the statements, if that makes sense. But I do occasionally see that where somebody's got a CV and they have like a brief, paragraph or a couple sentences to describe something that might not make sense without more narrative structure. Um,
Yeah, I
so
think
does
that
that
makes
answer the
sense.
question?
Yeah, and perhaps it depends on what type of position. So if it's a teaching heavy position, maybe you do want something about your teaching philosophy, like in that elevator pitch, like you were talking about, and
Mm-hmm.
perhaps not if it's a research focused position.
Right. Yeah. I think, yeah, you can play around with um, your professional interests in the professional summary area of the document, on the resume or the CV, where you are saying, experienced researcher with X number of years doing blah, blah, blah experiments or techniques or whatever, versus experienced professor with this type of experience or
Ye-
knowledge, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah.
We have a question that came in the chat that I can read
Okay.
for you. Razun Sharma asks, I have a retail industry of 10 years and I completed a master's in psychology this year. How should I present or transition into academia? I plan to apply for a PhD in clinical psychology in the next cycle.
Okay, so retail experience plus a master's. So you're applying,
So they're planning to apply into a PhD program. How do they take those sorts of skills and tailor it to the academic setting?
so that's where you would revisit something like the transferable skills slide and determine the right side would be based on the job description, or not the job description, but the program requirements for their admission, to see like what they're looking for in a PhD candidate, and then thinking about how your experience applies to that. And I will say that the nice thing is people, when you move from industry or non-academic roles into academia, that's not necessarily frowned upon because you don't know what the reviewer, what their experience is, or what they're looking. I mean, they'll tell you a little bit of what they're looking for, but that is a way to distinguish yourself and say, I have this experience. I mean, working in retail, you've got a lot of experience with psychology and working with humans. So there's a lot of transferability that you can analyze between your experience and what they're looking for and think about how to use their buzzwords. Um, I would say for any time when you feel like there might not, like you're questioning whether you have the skills to do a job, um, go back to the job description and try to remind yourself of why you were interested in it in the first place. Because usually what happens is as you read the job description, you're like, oh yeah, I've done this. I have, or well, I guess I did this in this way. Like go through that conversation with yourself again, because that's going to give you the content to draw upon to customize it.
I think that's great advice. I think at least I can speak for myself in academia, we seem to um, have almost tunnel vision about what our skills are, when in reality, if you sort of broaden out what you've been doing in either getting a PhD or doing a postdoc, you've been managing a project, you've been mentoring people, you've been doing so many different things that can apply to so many different positions and careers, that I think
Yes.
that's great advice.
Yeah, taking the high level view of those high level skills that you're developing. Um, and that's why that list is so helpful, because when you go and you review the things that you've accomplished and all that you've done, and you look at your calendar and the types of meetings you've had, like that's going to give you some ideas of, the attributes that and characteristics that you have enhanced over time. And again, that will feed into your transferability.
I'll have one more question to close us out. Is
Sure.
there a time point in which you would not continue to discuss previous accomplishments? So, like, is there a hard line at don't talk about anything that happened before you received your undergraduate degree or anything like that? Or is it just all dependent?
So I would say for CVs, excuse me, maybe for undergrad, some of the undergrad stuff, unless it's something that's like nationally or internationally recognized, I probably would leave it off, or maybe not do explanatory thing. Like if you want to put that you were, the president of whatever club that's related to your field, that's fine. But I think masters and above is really where you're focusing. Um, but many people get presentation or research experience in publications in undergrad as well. So if it's relevant to the job description and the role, I wouldn't necessarily leave it out, but I wouldn't say your list needs to be exhaustive. And no, high school yearbook superlatives don't go on the CV anymore.
That's Dr. Savag, who's taking on our next session,
Yeah,
popping into the chat.
perfect.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Val.
You
This
are
was so
welcome.
informative and helpful. And we will be sure to send out your slides and then
Yes.
get everyone the recording once we have that uploaded.
All right. Well, thanks again for the invite.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.